From the nation's capital, Eye on Washington with Marilee Joyce. A weekly discussion about the federal issues most important to Nevada. And now, from Washington, D.C., here's Marilee Joyce.
And good day to you. I'm Marilee Joyce, and this is Eye on Washington, the only statewide Nevada news program produced in Washington, D.C. Every week, Eye on Washington takes you straight to Capitol Hill for a discussion with Nevada's delegation and other leaders about the federal matters that matter to you. Today's topic, the Sage-Grouse saga. As a September decision looms, what's the conservation strategy plan to avoid an endangered species listing of the bird? And my guests today are Nevada U.S. Congressman Mark Amodei and Crescent Hardy, and thanks so much for being here today.
Good to be here, Marilee.
Glad to be here myself.
Last December, lawmakers passed a spending bill with a legislative rider that effectively postponed a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service decision on whether sage-grouse in Nevada and 10 other western states ought to be listed as threatened or endangered species. And today on Eye on Washington, we'll update you on the demand by Congressman Amodei that the feds come up with a habitat plan that would avoid having to list the bird. We'll find out why such a little animal is causing such a big stir, and we'll find out what impact a listing would have on Nevada, its economy, as well as its environment, and how my guests say we can achieve balance. The Las Vegas Review-Journal reported in January that 3/4 of voters in the West say it is important to protect sage-grouse habitat, and that a majority supports a strong Bureau of Land Management plan to protect the bird and its environs. But as my guests say, wanting the sage-grouse protected does not necessarily equal wanting listing under the Endangered Species Act, that there's time for collaboration between rural communities, industries, government agencies, and wildlife enthusiasts so that the sage-grouse can remain a state-managed species. In fact, Congressman Amodei laid down the gauntlet on this last December, telling federal land managers to come up with a plan so that a listing can be avoided. He says, find a way to protect the bird without blocking off vast tracts of western land and thereby disrupt ranching, mining, oil and gas production, not to mention throw a wrench in the fun plans of recreationists. And gentlemen, welcome to the show. Yeah, we're going to update our statewide audience on all this in a moment. But first, Congressman Amodei, there's considerable confusion over that legislative rider that was passed at the end of 2014. Help us understand, what was its goal? What limits does it place on the Fed? Can they recommend but not enact a listing, et cetera?
Well, actually, it's been considerably complicated when you run it through the executive branch. But in a nutshell, we wanted to move things back a year to allow the Department of Interior to ask for funds to do what they're supposed to do with the habitat that they own, which in Nevada is 87% of the state. In other words, if you're going to ask private people to do things for the bird's habitat, and if you're going to ask states to do things for the habitat, then you as the majority landowner ought to do the same and put your skin in the game. And they hadn't done that until, Marilee, recent fact, they've now got a budget out that requests $60 million additional dollars to do things on the ground for the bird's habitat on federal land.
Congressman Hardy, I know the goal is to keep the sage-grouse state managed, but you know, wildlife advocates are saying that without this ESA listing, the bird can't survive. How do you respond to that?
I would say that it can survive, and it has been doing very well just under the state's management and purview so far. But like the Congressman just said, 87% of the state is owned by the federal government. Where's the participation from the federal government? It's on their lands. Things like wildfires that we've all talked about are the biggest detriment to the species itself, whether it be the sage-grouse or the desert tortoise like it is down in my district.
Congressman Amodei, you've really been the delegation leader on this issue since it began. Would you take our audience back to March of 2010 and tell us how this little bird caused such a big flap, if you will?
Well, in a nutshell, Marilee, in the last 20 years, we've burned between 6 and 7 million acres of ground in Nevada. So you can't say, well, we haven't lost habitat. We have. But at the same time, we have permitted BLM district managers and Forest Service district rangers have permitted about 150,000, 170,000 acres of multiple use stuff, mining, recreation, the stuff that you mentioned. Sure. And so when you sit there and compare those two numbers, you say, why are we losing habitat? The inescapable conclusion is we've lost it to catastrophic wildland fire. And so if we really care about the resource, we should address catastrophic wildland fire. I mean, not that we shouldn't look at the other stuff, but its threat to habitat is about like this when you look at fire like this. So the frustrating part for your viewers is this, like obviously we ought to look at mining, we ought to look at all those other man activities, but we need to address the resiliency of our landscape to wildland fire.
The two sides, those who say the Nevada economy, mining, gas and oil production, not to mention your recreationists, et cetera, and what that's going to mean to a state that is still struggling from the recession, versus others who might say, oh, come on, the almighty dollar is not more important than the bird. But you're saying, actually, there's a balance here. There is time to develop a conservation plan. Is that correct?
I absolutely believe there's time to develop that plan, and I believe that it can be done very efficiently. If we're going to talk about these issues, we can't talk about them without understanding that this may be something other than an environmental issue. I believe that the hunters and the people that are involved can actually develop a plan that sustains a good quality growth of that, but we need to also look back, and is this something else? If it is becoming a resource management plan to stop us from taking those resources that we require to have a strong economic state, let's discuss it on that level. Let's stop using environmental targeting to stop that kind of growth in our state and other states, and that's what I sometimes.
Amodei, you agree with that?
Nobody's opposed to the sage hen, okay? Nobody's opposed to a healthy environment. The fact of the matter is that the governor of the state of Nevada has jurisdiction over about 300,000 acres. The Secretary of the Interior has jurisdiction in Nevada through her agencies of about 56 million. And so when you talk about environment in Nevada, you talk about federal land use management history. And therefore, under that, the third grade civics thing, separation of powers, it's like you can't combine the rulemaking, the enforcement, and the judicial functions all in one department to say, oh, we've got a problem and we've decided we failed, so we're going to send ourselves to timeout. It's imminently solvable if it's really about the resource and not ending multiple use in the West.
Okay. And when we return, how did one little bird cause such a big flap? Let's find out right after this.
You're watching Eye on Washington with Marilee Joyce, brought to you by Caesars Entertainment, the Las Vegas Sands Corporation, the Regional Transportation Commission of Washoe County, the Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority, Boyd Gaming, Rogich Communications Group, and by Jim Marsh Automotive.
I got my own iPod Touch and use my dad's login to get on gambling sites. Poker is the best, but I'm losing a lot. Since I'm too young to play, they're not allowed to keep the money and my dad won't find out. That's right, isn't it?
Want more federal news that affects Nevada, its businesses, and its residents? Then you need to subscribe to Nevada's Washington Watch newsletter, your sole source of online news direct from Washington, D.C. Visit joycecommunications.com and subscribe today.
All of us at Caesars Entertainment have something we want to say.
Play responsibly.
Play responsibly.
We don't want you to gamble if you've had too much to drink.
You shouldn't gamble if you're lonely or depressed.
And if you're under 21, you're not allowed to play.
No.
No matter which of our casinos you come to, our message is always the same.
Play responsibly.
Play responsibly.
Play responsibly.
We know you're coming to our casinos to have a good time, and we always want you to leave feeling like you did.
Having your child hospitalized can be a terrifying experience for any parent. In one moment, everything can change. Here at the Reno Ronald McDonald House, we can help. We keep families together when it matters the most by providing a home away from home for families with children in the hospital. Parents who stay at the Ronald McDonald House have more time with their children during the healing process. Please contact us today for more information and to see how you can help. Donate online at rmhc-reno.org.
And welcome back to Eye on Washington, our discussion of the latest concerning a possible ESA listing for the sage-grouse. My guests today are Nevada U.S. Congressman Mark Amodei and Crescent Harding. Well, this whole situation started several years ago. The sage-grouse was losing habitat for various reasons in Nevada, mostly because of wildfires. So in March 2010, along comes the Fish and Wildlife Service, whose officials decide that an ESA listing was justified. It didn't come about, though, because the service had other higher listing priorities. So then environmental groups sued. They said an immediate listing was needed, or else the bird had a slim chance of survival. The suit settlement agreement set a final deadline of the end of this September for a listing decision. So here we are. The two sides: list the bird and you cripple the Nevada economy. Don't list the bird and you care more about economic progress than habitat protection of and the Western way of life. Well, my guests say, hang on, calmer heads can prevail. Work together on a conservation strategy that protects the habitat and avoids a listing. And Congressman Amodei has said we are where we are in part because the feds haven't done enough to preserve grouse habitat on Forest Service and BLM lands. In fact, Congressman, last December, you were none too happy. You said that for 3 years, you have worked on the habitat issue that, quote, these guys at Interior have never asked Congress for habitat money, and that you want to see at least $25 million a year in the Interior's budget request for these rescue efforts.
It's pretty simple. If you're the landowner, you have responsibility. If you're a state landowner in this instance, you have responsibility. If you're a private landowner, you have responsibility. Shouldn't be any different if you're a federal landowner. Curious thing about Nevada is you own the vast majority of state habitat, federal government. So if you're holding people to these standards, please feel free to hold yourself to the same standard, and that means resources to execute plans.
You mentioned while we were in break that they've actually had a lot longer than the 3 years. This actually goes back to the Gwynn administration, that they've had about 10 years to come up with this, and for the first time you're getting requests for a budget.
Well, and I mean, this started back, Kenny Gwynn put together the first Sagebrush System Eco Council, and so here we are now. Kenny Gwynn, Brian Sandoval, is the present governor, who's continued the Gwynn model, done a good job of putting those folks together. J.J. Gokachia is the chair. They've done a great job. And so if it's really about habitat, and now Secretary Jewell, credit where credit is due, showed some leadership. $60 million request in this budget. I went before the Budget Committee yesterday and said, please support this. It's a good thing for 11 Western states. So it's like, listen, I think that's a significant fact to turn around to Mr. Ash and his folks at Fish and Wildlife and say, this is phenomenally significant and should make it very difficult for you to list it because people are paying attention and putting their money where their mouth is.
You know, the rider, again, the delay, it does buy some time, and hopefully gets Interior to request the money, as you said, and for habitat conservation. But I think your best comment, again, from December, you said the Obama that this is the Obama administration approach seems to be list the sage-grouse first, then address habitat protection. So your argument has been they've really had this backwards.
Well, if it's really about the resource, you want to preserve, you want to restore, you want to do all those good things for the resource, which is the habitat for this bird and other species.
Sure.
So there's no magic in listing it. The magic is in turning around the loss of resource. And so, unless those folks who think it's all subterfuge to end multiple use in the West are right, I hope they're not.
Congressman Harding?
I have a different target. Is we continue to want to list species out there. Somehow, what is the number? What's the magical number that puts this on the listing? What is the one that the number that takes it off? That never seems to be addressed. It's a confusion, I believe, that you can just go out and identify something and say, yeah, we got a challenge with this, and the federal government has the ability to just surge forward and start putting something on the list. So that's one of the challenges that I have with these listings, like the tortoise and the sage-grouse and other issues throughout the West.
Where do you think this is going to go? Do you think the conservation plan is going to be made, it'll remain state managed, or are you, how concerned are you that?
I would say that there should be always concern about it. But I think that our delegation will fight to make sure that we can do everything we can to support the other delegations within 11 states to make sure that we're have a management plan and get the government to do their part. And what is that management plan going to be?
Congressman Amodei, I read that some are concerned that what's going to happen is that a similar rider is going to be passed again next year and next year and next year and forever. And
well, first of all, Marilee,
in other words, effectively making the listing impossible.
Well, first of all, it's 12 months. 12 months in the context of anything the federal government does is hardly war and peace and a millennia or whatever. So methinks thou dost protest too much. The 12 months was to allow them to have a budget cycle, to ask for resources to do the right thing. And you know what? They've done it. Sure. So in my opinion, the reason that I support it has now been satisfied. So it's like, I'm not interested in doing it for another 12 months. If Fish and Wildlife wants to list it when their own secretary says this is unprecedented in terms of fire issues and restoration issues and habitat preservation issues, be like, well, that'd be Exhibit A if I was in court trying to overturn Fish and Wildlife's determination.
And the rider made sense, right? You needed that time until September for them to request that money and come up with a plan.
The reason was very practical, and that was we wanted to be able to go in the listing process and say that the federal government is doing their part for the habitat they own by requesting funding in the budget process. Okay. So, but in that context, let's declare victory and move on.
And when we return, what would an ideal conservation plan look like? Let's ask my guests right after this.
Nevada's direct link to Capitol Hill. Eye on Washington with Marilee Joyce, the only statewide Nevada news show based in Washington, D.C. All the top federal matters that matter most to Nevadans. Marilee talks with our congressional delegation and other leaders about the federal news you need to know. Eye on Washington with Marilee Joyce, Nevada's Eye on Capitol Hill.
I got my own iPod Touch and use my dad's login to get on gambling sites. Poker is the best, but I'm losing a lot. Since I'm too young to play, they're not allowed to keep the money and my dad won't find out. That's right, isn't it?
All of us at Caesars Entertainment have something we want to say.
Play responsibly.
Play responsibly.
We don't want you to gamble if you've had too much to drink.
You shouldn't gamble if you're lonely or depressed.
And if you're under 21, you're not allowed to play.
No.
No matter which of our casinos you come to, our message is always the same.
Play responsibly.
Play responsibly.
Play responsibly.
We know you're coming to our casinos to have a good time, and we always want you to leave feeling like you did.
I've got a job to do today.
I've got a job to do today.
Have a good first day at work, Mom.
Your donations to Goodwill fund job training programs right in your community.
Feels good to start fresh, right?
Sure does. And like that, you're a job creator.
I got my own iPod Touch and use my dad's login to get on gambling sites. Poker is the best, but I'm losing a lot. Since I'm too young to play, they're not allowed to keep the money and my dad won't find out. That's right, isn't it?
I got a call during training camp. My son was born 5 weeks early with end-stage renal failure. We started dialysis at about 9 months. We hooked him up every single night, and then they said we need to get him a transplant. And my wife, amazingly, was a match. The second he had that transplant, he wanted to eat. Fast forward 5 years, he's in kindergarten, rides his bike, does all the normal stuff a 6-year-old does. I don't think there's anything more special than giving life.
And welcome back to Eye on Washington, our discussion of the Sage-Grouse listing saga. We've been visiting with Nevada U.S. Congressman Mark Amodei and Crescent Hardy. Well, since we're all about giving you topics for your next dinner party, Here's some greater sage-grouse trivia for you. 30 inches long, 2 feet tall. Guys weigh about 5 pounds, gals about 3. And those guys have to strut their stuff. Only 1 or maybe 2 males get chosen by the females for all mating. Average lifespan is 1 to 1.5 years, but they can survive up to 10 years in the wild. Omnivores mostly enjoy sagebrush and some other soft plants and insects. In Nevada, the grouse inhabit 5 counties, 17 million acres. They prefer elevations between 4,000 and 9,000 feet and cannot survive in areas where sagebrush does not exist. Congressman Hardy, in Nevada, the biggest habitat threat has been wildfires, correct?
I believe that is probably the biggest damage.
Any idea how big, either of you, how big this problem is, or this part of the problem is, or how much habitat's been lost?
Well, I don't know if they figured out how much habitat. We know how much we've burned. The challenge in the fire sense is this. The state's undertaken about a $2 million effort to figure out where those sage hen leks are, you know, the coveys of them, if you will. And so when you talk about fire, you do a couple things. You say, okay, we know which way the storms usually come from. That's the way the wind blows. You manage fuels around those areas, so if there is a fire that hits, has a chance to lay down, and they can save that. And then for those areas where they don't have the ability to save it, then you go in with an aggressive restoration plan to bring that habitat back as soon as possible. And actually they've got a pretty good suppression record in Nevada. So there's 3 or 4 moving parts. Right. What you do before the fire and what you do after the fire, we think, are phenomenally important in the context of this bird.
What does an ideal conservation plan look like?
I think it has to be a series of things. It's going to have to be some human element of management, but I think there's other easier management plans. If you look at the history of Nevada, when were forest or range fires more prevalent? It's been over the last 40 years when they've started to move ranchers and farmers off the ground, and with which the cattle and sheep actually remove those invasive species that are so volatile to the sagebrush areas. So I think it has to be a combination of utilizing those type of programs along with others that biologists may come up with.
Congressman?
Fuels. If you got a lot of fuel, the fire burns really hot. You haven't got much, less fuel, it burns less hot. That's better for everybody concerned. Fire is a natural part of rangeland management. But when you let fuels build up, either through not grazing or through not managing them through other techniques, then when it burns catastrophically, sterilizes the soil, habitat's no good for anybody. We can prevent that.
You sit on House Appropriations.
Yep.
How are you using that position to influence this?
Well, obviously, I moved over to the Interior Subcommittee, and so that's a big part. We spoke with Secretary of Interior yesterday on that subcommittee. Congratulated her on her request for that money. We're going to work real hard to make sure that she has it. Went in front of the Budget Committee yesterday afternoon and talked with them about this needs to be part of the budget too. So, and Marilee, I can't stress enough, the reason is to be able to go to Fish and Wildlife and say, there you go. Yep. There is a significant dedication of resources to dealing with this problem, and the major landowner, which is you, don't list it.
Okay. And when we return, our final word on that bird, right after this.
All of us at Caesars Entertainment have something we want to say.
Play responsibly.
Play responsibly.
We don't want you to gamble if you've had too much to drink.
You shouldn't gamble if you're lonely or depressed.
And if you're under 21, you're not allowed to play.
No.
No matter which of our casinos you come to, our message is always the same.
Play responsibly.
Play responsibly.
Play responsibly. We know you're coming to our casinos to have a good time, and we always want you to leave feeling like you did.
Nevada's direct link to Capitol Hill. Eye on Washington with Marilee Joyce. The only statewide Nevada news show based in Washington, D.C. All the top federal matters that matter most to Nevadans. Marilee talks with our congressional delegation and other leaders about the federal news you need to know. Eye on Washington with Marilee Joyce. Nevada's Eye on Capitol Hill.
I got my own iPod Touch and use my dad's login to get on gambling sites. Poker is the best, but I'm losing a lot. Since I'm too young to play, they're not allowed to keep the money and my dad won't find out. That's right, isn't it?
Want more federal news that affects Nevada, its businesses, and its residents? Then you need to subscribe to Nevada's Washington Watch newsletter, your sole source of online news direct from Washington, D.C. Visit joycecommunications.com and subscribe today.
And we are back with our closing segment of Eye on Washington. I'm going to ask you both, what do you predict is going to happen? Who wants it first?
I predict that they're going to get their money. I predict that there's going to be some progress made. If it's not the right progress, then we'll blame it on the federal government.
I'm going to use the Secretary of Interior's word that she picked, and that is unprecedented action on this in terms of their budget requests. She's issued a fire secretarial order for the West, and so I think those are all very significant things which imminently justify Fish and Wildlife saying, we've got people's attention, they're doing the right thing by the resource, and so we don't need to list it.
Congressman Hardy, when I talked to your press director, Scott Knutson, prior to this taping, he said your philosophy is this, quote, we need a balanced approach that respects the environment and protects animals, but balance it with what is best for Nevada. Sometimes that's recreation, and sometimes that's a business endeavor. How confident are you that at the end of the day we're going to have a win-win?
We have to have that win-win. It's vital to the Nevada, and we need to make sure that people understand the cause and effect of the lack of responsibility from the federal side, and they have to be partners with us if they're going to hold that much land.
And are you confident the feds are going to do their part in getting that plan together?
You know, Marilee, to suggest that it's either one way or the other is phenomenally disingenuous and ignores most of the facts. It is not a Republican or Democrat thing. It is entirely possible to do the right thing by the resource, have everybody do their part, including the feds with their funding and their management practices, and not list it so that people who graze on it, mine, recreate, explore for oil, energy, all those sorts of things. It is possible to have a environmentally responsible, multiple use theory on this, and that's what we should do.
Great. I hope you'll come back on again when we follow up on this.
Great, thanks.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thanks for being here. That is it for this week's Eye on Washington. Be sure to join us next time as we discuss more important federal matters and their impact on you in Nevada. Visit joycecommunications.com or our Facebook page for more of the very latest from the Hill that impacts your life, and follow me on Twitter. And no need ever to miss our show. Check out previous Eye on Washington with Marilee Joyce broadcasts on YouTube. That's it. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Marilee Joyce in Washington, D.C. Have a great day.